We have on our panel today Nimit, Sawhney, founder and CEO of Voatz, and David Schoenberger, CIO of Eclypses. Our goal for today's conversation is to provide a state of the union on where we are with security in the use of technology in democracies. What should be our attitude and outlook about security in critical infrastructure? Now, Nimit has a lot of experience with elections. In 2020, Voatz became the first mobile voting platform to be used in a US presidential election. And David is the futurist on the panel. Eclypses is focused on quantum-resistant security, protecting data communications between endpoints, including mobile applications, preparing us for security threats that we might not be able to see yet, and perhaps not even imagine. And I do apologize for the bins outside being picked up. We've got a little background noise, but that should clear up shortly. So let's start the session with Nimit. Can you tell us your point of view on securing elections, and how much do you focus on security, and what's your biggest fear when running an election? So we've got a three-parter there.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you everybody for joining us today. I think that's we could talk about those three questions for a few hours and still not get through all the material. But in a nutshell, I think security of our elections infrastructure, there's no magic bullet around it. It's a layered approach. You look at the different components of the infrastructure, the different methods of voting. And then for each of those scenarios, it's really important to do a risk analysis. And then based on those risks, prepare a mitigation strategy based on the severity and the priority of those risks. So at a high level, that's the nature of the space. No system is 100% perfect, whether it's in-person voting or voting via mail, or using any remote voting technology like ours, or any other system out there. At the same time, with each of these approaches, we believe there's a way to make it safe enough so that we can have a reasonable level of assurance that everything happens in an auditable manner, in a manner where we can have high confidence that the result of the election is what actually happened as well. In terms of how we look at security, I mean, security is the core focus of what we do. We started as a security platform, and then voting is a use case on it, unlike some other companies out there who kind of do it in the reverse manner. And how much do we focus on it? I mean, it's a 24/7 thing. As I said, no system is 100% safe. And even if you have something that's safe enough today, tomorrow, it's very likely it's no longer safe enough. And so it's a constant work in progress. It's a constant approach to learning, and basically trying to stay 10 steps ahead of the adversaries. And the important thing to keep in mind is to have a layered defense approach, have a lot of detection, have a lot of mitigation measures, with the goal that if somebody does manage to breach one of those parameters, that they are not able to do massive damage or disrupt the integrity of the process. So that's how I would describe our approach.
Why do you think that people are happy to do their banking, their shopping, and even choose their romantic partner online, but they feel reticent about online voting?
I think it's a matter of time. I mean, if we look at it 10, 12 years ago, I remember myself when I first downloaded a mobile banking application, even though I was working in the space, I come from a security background, I was scared. Like, do I really want to do my banking on my phone? And it took a little bit of time for me to get comfortable with it. And now most of us don't think twice about it. Traders are doing, billions of dollars of transactions from their smartphones on a daily basis. So it's a matter of time. It will happen. as more and more people, get used to the technology. At the same time, there is a key difference between voting and everything else. I think voting has a sense of emotionality attached to it. So a lot of times our decisions around it aren't exactly logical, if I can use that word. So we have to keep that in mind, that you could have the most safe technology out there and people could still be skeptical about it. So there's an added element of how do you build trust in something new? And that naturally takes time. It's not going to happen overnight. So that's how I would describe the skepticism, where eventually, as they say, the future always wins. So we will get there.
I like that positive approach. So David, to bring you into the conversation, we already have a lot of challenges with securing our infrastructure. What is your analysis of where we are today and where we might be 5 years from now?
Thank you. Yes, that's a big question. And as we look at today, as we look at where we're at today with security challenges, Nimit brings up the right thought. It's trust. What are we able to provide in terms of trust and the integrity of the data? Our challenges tend to be around data integrity. We know that apps are coming out every single day, more and more apps, more and more sensors are being connected at the edge. 5G technology itself has provisioned so many more things to be connected and so much more data now moving back and forth. It's interesting, just this past weekend, Google launched or released their sleep tool that goes right by your bedside, that's even measuring some of through sensors, your sleep patterns and things. So we are so willing as humans to allow so much data to be spread through these apps, through these sensors, through these devices willingly. And our biggest challenge right now is priority, in my opinion. I think the wrong priority is given to user experience as opposed to security. And that's just flat wrong. We have to change our approach to security and understand that our adversaries, hackers, malicious people want to take that data and use it against us. One of the reasons why SolarWinds hack was so effective is, and it got past Cyber Command and our own intelligence in the USA, is that we're being hacked with our own infrastructure. 5G was used against us. Hackers are using our own infrastructure against us, and we're not protecting things at the data layer. We're trying to keep people out. We're not trying to keep people away from the data. And so one thing that Eclypses focuses on through our product MTE is to make sure that the data itself is protected the moment the sensor produces it or the app generates that value. We are protecting it before it even hits an operating system. And I think that's the priority that got to change. Focus on the data, realize that in the future, more devices are going to be connected. Quantum computing, as an example, is going to become a hacker's weapon of choice to defeat the things that we already know today. So it's not a matter of if you're going to get hacked, it's when you're going to get hacked and how you're going to get hacked, but what is going to happen with the actual data values. That's the focus, and I think that's the future of what we as our own company, but as partnered companies with Voatz and even the democracy of data itself, we have to protect the data itself.
If it is a case of, it's not if, it's when we're going to get hacked, should we be so focused on electronic voting, or should we be sticking to old-fashioned paper ballots?
No, with the advance of security, we can actually secure the data, secure the vote, and actually bring trust back into these applications, because the data itself cannot be compromised. It can be delivered to the receiving endpoint without compromise. We can trust this more than a paper process. I believe that the data security and the focus on data security will bring that trust back into the equation.
Okay, thank you. Back to Nimit. What do you think's the delicate dance between access and security? Do we have to compromise security for access?
Not necessarily. I think in the past, that's kind of been played out as a choice that you can only do one or the other. However, if you look at the significant advancements that have happened on various devices and operating systems over the last, let's say, 5 to 7 years. Our smartphones, our tablets, even many of our laptops have become so accessible in terms of providing features for citizens who have any form of disability, motor challenges. You can easily connect Braille keyboards. You can have very accurate speech to text. And so given that, I don't think we have to make that choice anymore. I think we can do both together and leverage the billions of dollars of investment which companies like Apple, Google, Samsung, Motorola have already put into this space over the past many years, and bring that sort of latest usability for a citizen with disability without compromising on their security. So I would say it's no longer a choice. We can do both together.
How do you think that we combine anonymity with strong authentication?
That's a hard problem to solve, because one of the key distinguishing factors from which distinguishes a use case like voting from a financial transaction, something you might do with your mobile banking or your internet banking application, is that very thing. In a scenario, in one of the scenarios, it is required for your identity to be tied to that transaction. And you can always layer authentication on that. Most of our newer devices now come with the hardware-based security. So not only can you do biometrics, you can do multi-factor authentication and protect that sort of initial gate. But from that point onwards, the really interesting challenge is what can you do to ensure that the integrity of the transaction is maintained, but at the same time, for a use case like voting, where if you have a secret ballot requirement, how do you ensure that nobody can connect those two things together and potentially reverse engineer and find out how you voted? So that there are systems out there. There's the whole idea of zero knowledge proofs and homomorphic encryption, which has actually made this possible. So you can mathematically get an assurance that the integrity of the transaction is good, and at the same time not have to reveal the identity of the person, and protect that whole process with a multi-factor authentication-based approach, which could use device-based biometrics or even wearables, or third-party security devices like a YubiKey, etc.
So staying with protecting data, David, can you provide real-world scenarios where your technology could have prevented a mass data breach?
That's a fun question to talk through, because many of the data breaches itself are around passwords. And once you get a password, you can get into a system. And once you get into the system, then you can affect the way the data is manipulated. And then when it's delivered into an organization or into a receiving endpoint, it's been compromised. And the SolarWinds hack, or even this recent camera hack, the Verkada camera hack, a lot of this was around the passwords. And passwords are important, and yet they're not necessarily needed in a true zero trust environment. When the two endpoints are able to have a way of knowing without a human involved, the two endpoints know how to communicate, and they know that each other are able to talk to each other, then we can eliminate the need for usernames and passwords, and thereby prevent some of these breaches. If one endpoint has been paired uniquely with the receiving endpoint, and the MTE technology actually solves for this. When the two sides are paired, because of some of the ways that we can mathematically and with nonce and entropy and a personalization string, we can ensure that these 2 points can only talk to these endpoints. No other man in the middle attack, no other things can come into the middle of this communication stream. We then can remove the ability for a hacker to have a username and password and manipulate this. I think that some of these hacks are because of some sloppiness, and username and passwords are often able to be found out by hackers. If that's not part of the equation, then we can prevent some of these hacks, and especially on mobile devices. Usernames and passwords are often compromised because either the user himself has downloaded malicious things intentionally, where they thought they were pulling in an app on their device that was going to give them some kind of user convenience, and yet it brought in some malicious tools. If one app can only communicate to a receiving endpoint through the way our process allows for these two to be securely paired, then even if there's malicious software on the device, these two endpoints will never share usable data outside of the two receiving endpoints. So I think yes, the SolarWinds hack, there's ways that we could have prevented that. The Verkada hack on these web cameras, we could have prevented that. The Walmart mobile app, the Walgreens mobile app, we could have prevented that using our MTE technology. It's very simple to use, and that's the thing. Because we're able to now come below the operating system, we can install our tool right as the app produces data, secure it before it hits the operating system, before the communication protocol is used. We can then secure the data before it's even available to any of these hacker tools or these hackers.
So assuming that you can protect the data as it's going from the person voting to, all the stuff receiving that information, what happens if during a live election there's an attack on the power grid, or something that technology relies on to work?
That's a good question. If there's no electricity, no data is moving. So if no data is moving, it's not compromised from that point. And yet the interesting thing that you bring up about the power grid and these things are often exposed to hackers because these sensors, these low-powered, resource-constrained devices do not have the ability to secure data even from a sensor standpoint. Our toolkit can solve that because we don't rely on sophisticated encryption algorithms and things that require processing power to use. Even though we can secure it with processing power, we could also secure data on microcontrollers and devices that don't require or don't have much power or much processing. So even some of the threats that have taken down power grids, we can prevent. Even some of the threats that cause those data points to be breached, absolutely preventable.
Just to add something over there, I think that's a really interesting point. If there were to be a massive attack like that, or a similar one where someone manages to disrupt half or 2/3 of the internet access for the whole country, how do you function in that scenario? Not just voting, but how does the official government infrastructure function in such a scenario? And I think one of the ideas that's frequently ignored in the conversation is this whole idea of resiliency. I think when we design systems, we have to take into account, is the system we are building actually resilient to that worst case scenario? And so if that were to happen, what are our options so we don't, bring standstill? So from a government, e-government, or even from an elections perspective, I think having choices is really important. So you never want to mandate just one way to do things. So let's take the example of voting. If we say everybody has to vote electronically, then that's not a resilient option, because if there's a massive power failure or internet failure,
right,
up with the whole election. On the other hand, if you say, let's give everybody a choice, let's have people the option of voting in person, because some people like that, why should you take that away? Let's even have a postal option for people who find that convenient. And let's have a remote voting option for people who like that. That way, you've distributed the risk. So in a worst case scenario, people have at least more than one choice to exercise. Similarly, look at the e-governance services. Look at Estonia. It's a really good example. They have 32 of their 35 e-governance services, which are available online, but they do have a a backup paper option and an in-person option. Should something go bad, you can always go transact in person or using paper. So I think having that resiliency and kind of that disaster resistance mentality is really important.
Yeah, I think it's important to give people different choices. And I think it's a fallacy associated with electronic voting that people think that the creators of it want it to replace all forms of voting, which I don't think they do. I think they want it to run alongside it. What would you say are some of the other misconceptions about electronic voting that are floating around?
I think there's a long list, but I would say some of the really important ones are, there is a notion that end user devices cannot be trusted and cannot be safe enough. So I think, as David mentioned, and as you look at the work which Apple has done and Samsung has done with their Knox focus, that's no longer true. With the recent advancements, you can get a very high level of assurance whether an end user device, in this case a smartphone or a tablet, is safe enough or not. So that has changed in the last 5 to 7 years and is often kind of missed from the conversation. The other aspect is, can you truly remotely identify an individual and prove beyond the element of doubt that they are who they say they are? And that's also solved now. It was actually mandated after 9/11, and NIST actually has a standard called 863. It has been adopted by the financial industry as it's required for compliance, and now it's kind of spreading like wildfire in other areas of our economy. And the third aspect is resilience, what we talked about earlier. So we now have systems which no longer have single points of failure. A really good example of that is the distributed ledger technology, popularly known as the blockchain, where it's really hard to disrupt something which is distributed so massively that there's no single point of attack. And lastly, I would say, in the past, it was possible to break into a single place or a group of places and cause mass damage to data. That possibility has also become exponentially harder now. It's no longer, you can't flip a switch and instantly compromise millions of devices out there when each of them are running unique protocols like David described. So that ability to do mass damage has significantly become more costly from an attacker's perspective. So I would say those are some of the key things which get missed from the conversation because they are relatively new and all these advancements have happened only in the last few years.
Thank you. David, do you think we have to worry about untethered hacks on smartphones when it comes to electronic voting?
We definitely have to be careful about that. We have to make sure that from any of these voting apps or any app that's communicating this type of sensitive data, of course, we have to rely on all of the best practices Nimit just described from the operating system, from the NIST standards at the application layer, but we also have to do something different about the data itself. And I think the approach that we've done with Voatz, with all of the other things that they have done, all the other standards that they have followed, we come in and complement those things. And yes, we do have to worry about that.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move into the Q&A section of our session right now. So we've had some questions coming in from the audience. Thank you. And there's still time to send some in if you're listening and you've got something burning that you want to have answered. Okay, so one question we've had here is why data first when it comes to security? They want to know, is it more important to secure the identity of the device first, the user connected to it, and then the data created by the device? Who'd like to field that?
it's kind of like a tag team. I think, the application developer, they have to certainly make sure that they're using the device and the identity management tools that the device offer and that the application can provide to assure that the individual interacting with that application has been proven. Like Nimit said, are you who you say you are? And so that's about the application itself and proper design things, and then using the tools of the device specifically, the biometrics, the thumbprint, the eye recognition, and those kind of things. I know more technology will emerge to enhance that even more. And yet, at that point, once that authentication has allowed the person into the device, now it's about the data. Now the data itself must be protected the moment that the data is produced. So by installing a tool right at the data layer, when the app produces the data, when the vote is actually typed in or selected on the screen, that's when security must begin. And we don't need to rely on the OS for that. We don't need to rely on communication protocols for that. If you rely on that alone, you're going to get hacked. Protect it, use these other protocols, but protect the data in such a unique way that we provide to make sure that when these other protocols are used, the life cycle and the delivery of that data to the endpoint has been kept, and that is in full integrity.
Another question we've had in is, will you show the how security is accomplished? So I think they mean just letting people know what's being done in terms of providing security. Because I think there's a little bit of mystery around the security of electronic voting. It's when you have an old system, with dropping some marbles into glasses of who you vote for, everyone can very easily see what's going on. But when it's done in a computer, people aren't quite sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the really exciting opportunities we have now to kind of build more visibility and transparency into the process is through the election pilots we've done. Voters for the first time get a receipt. So, and you don't have to be a math geek to audit your own vote. So you can use your own receipt. You can actually see the image of the paper ballot that's generated, even though you're marking your ballot on the phone. It's actually producing a paper ballot at the jurisdiction. That's what's printed and tabulated along with the the ballots that come in via in-person or mail voting. And you, for the first time as a voter, have the ability to get full confidence that not only was every oval recorded as you intended, but also the paper equivalent actually matched. And that level of end-to-end assurance didn't exist in the past. So that, we believe, is a game changer in terms of helping build trust from the ground up. It also lets election officials audit the process independently. Even if you didn't vote, you're a concerned citizen, it lets you audit an election independently. So we feel those are good ways to get more visibility in the platform. Another approach is to use use bug bounty programs, and parts of our system are already open source. So if you want to dive into the code level, we also collaborate with researchers, and we have a few videos on our website. So if you have any specific aspect to the system you want to dive in, we'd be happy to kind of dive in deeper with you and show you how every aspect is working, right from the the authentication to how the anonymity is happening and how the paper ballots getting generated and what role the blockchain is playing here in the whole ecosystem, even though it's still generating a paper ballot.
Thank you. David, we've got another one here, which I think you might be up for answering. With quantum computing, do we have the potential to break encryption?
That's a big question. Yes. And the answer is yes, absolutely. The faster a processor works, the faster math can be done. And encryption is just mathematical. And the faster that the processor in a quantum world can crunch the numbers, we can defeat the math that's out there. And yet, this becomes an opportunity. How do we stay ahead of what a quantum computer is going to do? We know that mobile apps are going to take a while before they're quantum computerized, but the quantum computers themselves can be used as weapons against us and by massive hacker tools, if you will, by foreign states and our worst enemies. They can use these tools to break the math of encryption and thereby understand the data. You know, it's always, encryption is always about the math, but it's also about the key. If the key is discovered, the data is discovered. And so there's many ways a quantum computer can defeat what we know as encryption today. You can defeat the math. You can reproduce the key, and if you have the key, you have the data. So the opportunity for quantum computing in the future is to stay ahead of the ability of the quantum computer to defeat encryption, and thereby better key management tools. Our product, for example, has a way of creating an instantly obsolete encryption key. Regardless of the encryption algorithm, we can generate a key that can only be used for that one piece of data sent over a single transmission, a single communication protocol, and it can never be used again. It can never be repeated. It can't even be discovered by a quantum computer. And thereby, it's not even relevant for a quantum computer to defeat encryption. We can use encryption, we can do things with keys and still not even be worried about what the quantum computer world can bring. And then focus on what quantum computing really is going to benefit us in, and being able to do things useful and not just use as a hacking tool.
Thank you. Okay, we have another question in from the audience. HR1/S1 subtitle J, which is the new voting bill, has a provision that does not allow for the electronic return of marked ballots. I'm sure this is on your radar, and if passed will create huge roadblocks with technology such as smartphone apps. What are you doing to advocate for technology such as the vote solution?
Yes, totally agree. I think that's a very regressive provision which some of the legislators have added. We absolutely oppose that. I think the decision on how to conduct elections traditionally has been left to the states in the US. And I think we shouldn't disrupt that process. Every state has its own approach of, vetting technologies, having approaches to serving military voters, voters with disabilities, citizens overseas. And I think such kind of provisions greatly disrupt that, what's already happening, some of the great work that's happening around the country. And so we absolutely oppose it. We've written to legislators and actively are lobbying to help change that. And we would greatly appreciate support from the community as well. We're happy to share names of the Senate Rules Committee members and the House Rules Committee members. If you'd like to, share your thoughts with them, we'd appreciate that. I think it's a really important issue. It ignores, those provisions ignore the needs of a large segment of voters, people who can't hand mark a paper ballot, for people for whom, post is not a reliable option, people for whom they just need options. You can't make it to the polling place. Look at the Native American tribes who are, historically so severely disadvantaged from the traditional methods of voting. And so no one's advocating that you open up new methods of voting to millions of voters overnight. I think all the people in this space, all the companies in this space have been very measured in their approach. That's why we've done so many pilots with forward-looking election officials, and that needs to continue. And we gradually bring more people who are able to access the system. There's a movement in some states to allow electronic voting to be used for municipal elections, which we feel is a great next step. If you look at local elections around the country, less than 15% of people vote in some cities and towns. It's in single digits. And that's not good for our democracy. We need to have more people participate at the local level, and these technologies can really help that. So instead of going back in time, let's have an open mind, and as I said, we appreciate any help from the community to help ensure that those provisions don't pass.
Thank you. So we've got time just for one last question now, which has been submitted from the audience. Is voter verifiable paper ballot necessary for the mobile voting option? And what's the vote's approach or solution for this issue?
I would say in the short term, it's very helpful. I think earlier in the conversation, we talked about the notion of building trust. So even though you're marking a ballot on a smartphone, you're getting a receipt, it is actually producing a paper ballot for tabulation. I think having that paper audit trail in the interim is really important. Eventually, after a few iterations, it is possible that that may become an option. When you look at countries around the world, look at Brazil, look at India, they no longer use paper. They have hundreds of millions of people voting securely on electronic machines. Granted, these machines are not yet connected to the internet, but it's still electronic. There is no paper ballot anymore. And so gradually it is possible to build that trust. I think once again, you leave the choice to the voter. If the voter wants a printed ballot and has the ability to print the ballot at home and mail it, even though they've marked it on the phone, that should be okay. If they have they're okay with remotely marking it and having it being printed at the election jurisdiction, that's fine too. I think giving people that choice so they can build their own levels of trust. And eventually we will see, like has happened in Estonia, is a really good example where more than a third of the country is now voting electronically. I think we'll get there. It'll just take a little bit of time.
Thank you. So I think the key takeaways are that there is no magic bullet for infrastructure security or any of this really, but we think technology is going to get us there. We talked about how vital risk analysis is and then coming up with a strategy based on that, and how important it is to have a lot of detection and mitigation strategies in place. And we also realize that a lot of it comes down to trust and also choice, but it's important for people, as you say, feel emotional about voting, to have the option to go in there on the day and do it and express themselves in that way. David spoke about using multi-factor authentication to protect data and then changing our approach to security so that there's a focus on that instead of user experience, which I thought was a very interesting takeaway. And we all need to up our password game. That was definitely something that I picked up after having this conversation. And finally, we need to take resilience into account for all these doomsday cyber attack scenarios that we constantly worry about when we work in this industry. So David and Nimit, thank you so much for joining us. Are there any final points that you wanted to make before we close today's first session?
No, thank you, Sarah. It's great to chat with you, and thank you, David, as well. I think my parting words to everybody, and thank you all for joining on a busy day, is that I think it's really important to keep an open mind when it comes to new technologies. At the same time, you should remain skeptical. I think one of our former presidents had this really cool phrase he used, just trust but verify. I think that's really relevant here as well. So be skeptical, but also have an open mind. There's a lot of new technology, a lot of fascinating work happening, all around our world. And a lot of that can be a force for good in terms of improving our daily lives. I mean, we've managed to miraculously develop a vaccine in less than a year, and millions of people are already using it. So that's a sign that when there is a will, there is a way. And so surely with all the technology and all the advancements out there, we can do voting safely online and in an environment where threats exist. We can make everything safe enough. So that would be my my last few words.
Thank you. Any final thoughts from you, David?
Yes, and thank you for letting Eclypses participate. It's always great to be a part of the brainstorming here. Parting thought is that mobile application security is possible. Trust is possible with the data. You can protect the data and make sure that it is not compromised. And with This project that we have with Voatz, it's a demonstration of that, but with the tool set that we offer, it is possible to secure a mobile app. And you don't have to rely on operating systems. You don't have to rely on communication protocols. You can protect the data. It can be not usable by anyone but the intended recipient. And so my only parting thought is it's possible. But thanks again for having Eclypses participate.
Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to more sessions in the future. And thank you to everyone who sent in questions as well. We appreciate that. And any that didn't get answered, our crew will find a way to get back to you very soon. Thank you.